In death penalty news, the United States Supreme Court did not take cert on a case coming out of Alabama with an inmate who seeks to die by nitrogen hypoxia. So this has been an idea that has been percolating for a while, and one state has adopted it as a method of death penalty. The way to do this would be you just put yourself into a room or some other device that would just feed you a pure or relatively pure nitrogen-S environment. Nitrogen, of course, is 78% of the atmosphere anyway. So you just change it to basically 100%. There being no oxygen in the room, the person dies as asphyxia. But because the person is able to breathe and get rid of carbon dioxide, they don't realize or they don't have the sense that they're not breathing properly. So it's like carbon monoxide in that way. Because you're able to get rid of carbon dioxide, your body doesn't have the sense of not being able to breathe. So you breathe normally, and then you just die, having felt slightly sleepy because of the lack of oxygen. So this has been an idea that has been percolating. One state has adopted it. The Supreme Court has refused to hear the case. Let's learn a little bit more. The U.S. Supreme Court sided with an Alabama inmate who had his lethal injection called off at the last minute because he argued he should be put to death by nitrogen hypoxia. So let's put you into a room filled with pure nitrogen, or let's put a mask on you and feed you a pure nitrogen environment. Nitrogen itself is not toxic. It can be vented safely into the atmosphere. So you don't have the same problems with, the gas chamber, for example, where you're using some sort of poison gas. And if that vents into the atmosphere in a way, that might be a problem because it's poison gas. Nitrogen by itself is not poisonous. It's 78% of the atmosphere. You breathe it all the time. So as long as the concentration isn't too high, it's not a problem. So you can vent it safely into the atmosphere. And also nitrogen, of course, is easy to obtain because it's 78% of the atmosphere. So it's very easy to find and manufacture pure nitrogen. So they would like to be put to death by the pure nitrogen. And the Supreme Court says, okay. Justices without comment rejected the Alabama Attorney General's request to review the 11th Circuit decision regarding an inmate named Kenneth Smith. The state argued the decision disregards Supreme Court precedent. An inmate challenging execution method must show the alternative method is readily available, not just feasible. So under the relevant law, you can challenge the method of death if you can show there is an alternative, right? So you can't resist the death penalty if you're not proposing an alternative for the reason of the method. Okay, you can obviously oppose the death penalty for other reasons. But if your argument is this method is bad, the law requires you to propose an alternative method. And this guy did that. He proposed an alternative method. The state said, well, this is not readily available, which is a bit strange, but that's what they said. And so the 11th Circuit said no. The Supreme Court said, go away. Alabama has argued that nitrogen hypoxia, an execution method that no state has used, is untested, which, it is. No state has used it. But there's been certainly many accidental exposures of nitrogen. It's happened many times where people have related to nitrogen hypoxia. So we do have some idea about how people respond to it. And people respond to it by, dying, but with no sensation that they're dying, which is, kind of scary because people will go into a pure nitrogen environment and they're breathing normally and they just feel a little lightheaded, and they don't really realize anything is wrong. And, by the time anything could be done about it, it's way too late. So we do have a pretty decent idea how people would respond to this because accidental exposures happen. And, as far as ways to go, it's pretty good. I mean, it's absolutely reliable. It's foolproof. It's painless. So as methods to go happen, it's pretty good. So, if you have your choice, nitrogen asphyxiation, not a bad way to go. Smith had been scheduled to be put to death by lethal injection in 2022 for a 1988 murder. On day of the execution, a divided 11th Circuit panel stayed the execution after raising concerns about previous injections, which there have been problems with administering, well, technically. So, yes, people have sometimes languished for long periods of time in lethal injections. Some of them had been botched pretty bad and led to some problems. It's kind of hard to botch the nitrogen asphyxiation thing. All you have to do is make sure that the room or the gas you're feeding them is 100% nitrogen, which is kind of hard to screw up, right? It's easy. Just do that. So he's like, let's do that because it's, pretty hard to screw it up. But the state had said, well, it's not listed as a method of execution in our state. Some state had listed it as a method of execution, but not our state. The Supreme Court lifted the stay, but prison officials ended up calling off the execution after unable to find a suitable vein. So apparently they had problems finding a vein to execute him. So they tried to execute him, but they couldn't find a vein to execute him. That's pretty bad. The Alabama governor announced a pause in executions to review procedures. The review came after multiple problems with intravenous lines. Yeah, somehow they managed to screw this up. It shouldn't be that hard, with the intravenous lines, but they managed to screw it up with some sort of disturbing frequency. The attorneys for Smith have claimed that the botched execution attempt is obviously a sign the state has no clue what it's doing, and sought a lawsuit seeking to prevent them from making a second attempt. So you already tried to execute me once, and you couldn't do it. That's how bad you are at this. You already tried. You already had one needle in my arm, but you couldn't do a second needle. But you'd like to give it another go. Dude, maybe you don't know how to do this. Maybe you're not very good at this. Maybe I don't trust you when it comes, oh yeah, it'll be painless. We know what we're doing. Yeah, maybe not. To subject Mr. Smith to a second execution by lethal injection could subject him to a torturous experience, has been established through Alabama's last 3 execution attempts, and other states too. So the lethal injection, which was designed to be painless and clinical, sometimes the states screw it up. That's when the drugs are available, by the way, which are also a problem. So can you actually do this? And are you not complete idiots? Because sometimes the states are complete idiots. The prosecution has said that Smith was one of 2 people who paid $1,000 to kill Elizabeth Sennett on behalf of her husband, who was deeply in debt. So he is part of the hiring party of a hitman. So murder for hire. So we're trying to execute the guy who helped hire the guy in the murder for hire plot. But can we actually get past this? We don't know. So Alabama lost that issue on that. But that brings us to the end of this case where the U.S. Supreme Court denied cert in an Alabama man who had sought to be executed by nitrogen. Nitrogen has been approved by one state as a method of execution. Alabama would like to do the lethal injection. They already tried to execute the guy once. They literally had a needle in his arm at one point, but apparently were unable to find a vein in which to put a second needle. So they're like, okay, it's just too late at night, we can't find, well, we'll do it another time. How's another time work for you, condemned inmate? Okay. So apparently we were going to give it a second go. And the inmate says, I don't really trust that the great state of Alabama can do the death penalty with a lethal injection. Whatever would make you think that? Points in general direction of all the things. Okay, well, what do you have? Well, I'd like the nitrogen. Well, that's not readily available. 11th Circuit disagrees because, just get some nitrogen from anywhere. Get a gas mask, you're set. It should be relatively easy. Again, because it's not a poisonous gas, you don't have to worry about as much about it being vented into the atmosphere because it's not poisonous. So it should be relatively easy to do this. So the 11th Circuit said, okay, that's fine. That's fine, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied review. So I suppose the great state of Alabama will now have to figure out the gas with the nitrogen thing. Can they figure it out? We will see. And that, for the moment, brings us to the end of discussion of this case.